Welcome to your midweek motivation. Hey, I don't know where you're at right now, but hopefully you're experiencing a pretty incredible time. I'm based in Minnesota, and today it's about 80 degrees, and the weather looks like it's going to be beautiful for another couple of days. But just beyond that is a wave of cold weather that's coming through, which makes you wonder, will the warm weather be gone for an extended period of time? The trees are changing when you drive out every day, when you go wherever it is that you go. There's one particular road that I drive down to get to my office that it seems like every day there's another tree along the way that's changing colors, which just makes you stand in awe of the world that we live in. At least for me, it does. It reminds me of the goodness of God, which is very specific to my worldview. I believe there's a God that created everything that you see, that it's not a mistake, that it just didn't happen, that there's purpose behind everything. Everything I do then has purpose. And so when I wake up every day and I go do whatever it is that I do, that there's a reason behind it. Everybody I talk to, every interaction means something, which is a major part of why I believe the way that I do about the things that I do, because I think that we can have an impact because God created us for a reason to have an impact in this world for his purposes, which then, driven by my worldview, causes me to care about everybody else around me. Worldview is a big deal. How about your worldview? What does your worldview cause you to do? Does it cause you to see people the way that God sees them? Does it cause you to understand the world a little bit differently, maybe to look at things with another lens? Or maybe you've never even thought about your worldview. You know, this week I had an opportunity to talk to a number of seventh graders. So one of the cool things about the church that I'm a part of is that there's also a Christian academy attached to it. And so one of the teachers invited me in to talk to these seventh graders about tough topics, things that they've been wrestling through. And they had some great questions. You know, I took it back to the very beginning. What's your worldview? What does it mean to be a Christian? And what does it mean to be human on this earth? And then because of that, based off of that understanding, what does it mean to interact with the world that we live in? And that was the foundation that I laid for him. The foundation that I've talked to a lot of people about as we deal with all the issues in our culture today. It goes back to what's our worldview? So what's your worldview? This week, as you think about everything going on around you, whether it's the weather, whether it's the current cultural issues, maybe political issues, whatever it is, it all stems from our worldview. We know the Bible very clearly then speaks into the world around us based off of a worldview that it was made for a reason and a purpose. Paul, one of the authors of the New Testament, is most notorious in speaking to current cultural issues. And I've been trying to do that over the last number of months, speak into specifically what's going on without using any specifics. One of the things that I've said recently is that I want to try to make it biblical, not political. I've had a number of people ask, well, Brett, is that possible? Well, here's the answer. The answer is if we have a biblical worldview, we will be political in nature at times because everything originates from our worldview. The way we view all of it comes from our foundation. It shouldn't be the other way around. One of the things that I've meant when I've talked about not being political is your politics should not be the originator of your worldview. Instead, it should be how you view life through a biblical lens. At least that's what I've been encouraging. Be biblical, not political. Biblical being the foundation, which then stems into how we live in our world today, which naturally then speaks into the world and how it operates, which for us is heavily political. Paul, like I said, an author of much of the New Testament, spoke into the current cultural context very clearly, but with a biblical worldview. One of the times that he specifically did it was in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. It says this, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." See, in that day, Paul's speaking into what was going on. They were giving of their physical bodies to anything and everything. See, it was hard to separate religion and the world at the time. There weren't those key categories where we have our religious and our secular. We have our holy and our non-holy. And oftentimes we bucket things in those categories. The time that Paul was around, it all blurred. They worshiped the emperor. They worshiped the leader. They worshiped the ruler. They worshiped whoever it was that was in charge. And they gave of themselves willingly, freely, without even thinking of the costs. And Paul speaks into the time specifically with a biblical worldview and says this: in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifice. Be different, holy and pleasing to God. This is how we worship God. We don't worship the world that we live in. We worship God. And in Paul's context, it was with their bodies, their physical beings. He goes on to say then, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Because everybody was doing it. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what we need in our culture today. Not to conform to the world, to give in to all the things that are going on, but instead to set ourselves apart, which is what Paul was saying. For him, it was physical. For us, it's spiritual, it's mental, and sometimes it is physical, that we must be set apart. So do not conform to the pattern of this world, but rather be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We need a new mind, a renewed mind, so we can make it biblical and not political. We must think about that. What's your worldview? In view of God's mercy, do what he wants us to do, because in doing so, we'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So for like week 5 or 6 in a row now, make it biblical, not political. It doesn't mean we won't get involved in politics. In fact, we'll very clearly speak into things when the time is right, with a biblical worldview, because that's where it should originate from. And then see what God does. I bet he changes his world through us, so that when people see us, they see him through us. Have a great week. See you next week.